Well, I just want to say a couple of words before I introduce Barb Denson, our program chair for today. Um, when I started thinking about the kind of speakers I wanted to have at the club this year, my first instinct was to have a speaker from the Blue Zones. And as you'll learn, the Blue Zones are regions of the world where people are focused on longevity and healthy living. And the reason I thought it was a good idea is I think we've created a little mini Blue Zone at the Outdoor Art Club, which is something for which I think you should all be proud. As you know, last month we celebrated our past presidents, of which two of them are over 100, and my own sponsor, Foxy Cannell, is well on her way to 102. Wow. So, we don't track birthdays at the club, so I don't even know how many centenarians we might have, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have several more. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Please welcome my co-program chair, Barb Denson, who will introduce our speaker, Nichole Warwick.
Many of you are familiar with blue zones in Italy and Greece and Costa Rica, Loma Linda, where people reach the age of 100 at rates 10 times greater than in the United States. Yeah, that's better. I have a bad knee. So blue zones, that's good. Blue Zones projects help people live better through a comprehensive community transformation project. And one of the newest projects is happening in Petaluma, and Nichole Warwick, our speaker, is the executive director of that project. And belonging is one of the Power 9 principles for health and longevity, and we have belonging in our organization here, and I think that's why Anne thought about having a presentation for us. Nichole is a longtime Sonoma County community member with decades of successful experiences innovating and leading environmental and social justice movements. She co-founded and directed several successful nonprofit organizations and projects focusing on environmental health. And I am happy to introduce Nichole Warwick to you. Oh, you'll take the big leap.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Barb.
Yeah.
I think we're spot on,
I'll
right?
take it all.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I tend to drop down low in my voice when I start talking. So if that's the case and you're in the back, will you just give me a little cue? That'll help me to facilitate well for you. Well, first, I just have to say how grateful I am to have been invited here. Especially with the meeting. Now, it's not every day that I think, well, that was a fantastic meeting. I'm so glad I showed up for that meeting. But your meeting was fantastic. And I didn't even realize some of the connections or the connective tissue that has already exists or woven together between this organization and my life personally. So as I was sitting there enjoying your meeting, I learned that the knitted hats that are being done here, that are being gifted in the community. 12 years ago, I received one of those knitted caps. I was a breast cancer, I am a breast cancer survivor, but at that time, 12 years ago, I was going through breast cancer treatment, and I was receiving healing meals from the Series Community Project, which had received a bunch of these hats from you. And I have to admit, I got choked up a little bit because we never realize the impacts that a small gesture like that makes on someone's life. So let me tell you, that small gesture of receiving somebody's knitted cap at a time when I was bald and fragile and vulnerable. I was 37 years old and I was raising teenage boys by myself. It was a gift of love. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So already I'm in love with all of you, and I'm so glad that we're all here together. I think the most important thing that I want to share about myself is the work that I get to be a part of with Blue Zones is very, very purposeful, but also very meaningful. Because as I shared as a breast cancer survivor, that was sort of an impetus for me to get involved socially in a different way. I felt the profound privilege of survivorship and also felt a little bit of responsibility, heaps of responsibility because I lived. And I learned a lot along the way. And part of that healing and growth process for myself is when I first stumbled upon the Blue Zones work. So I'm a researcher by design. Like my brain just wants to research information. So whenever a problem arises, I want to know as much as I can to be able to make an informed decision. That was also the case with my breast cancer healing journey. And so I started falling down the rabbit hole of research around what are some of the best practices that we can be a part of for ourselves, research around environment and exposure and toxicity, research on food and nutrition and what are the conditions that will create health and vitality. I was thinking not just for myself, but for my children as well. How could I help create conditions in our family so that this legacy that continues is a legacy of health and well-being and vitality? And a friend of mine, knowing that I was very down deep in the rabbit hole of all this research and a little bit overwhelmed by it all, handed me the Blue Zones book. And what I loved about it was it took all of this research that I had done and it brought it together in one sort of simple model. And I'll tell you more about that. But my connection to Blue Zones started much earlier before I even realized there was such a thing as a Blue Zones community transformation project, or that one day I might be alive to lead it. So it's pretty amazing. I love the unexpecteds that happen in life. At Blue Zones, really our purpose, a lot of organizations talk about mission. We have purpose. I heard that with this introduction here. This is a community of purpose. People who live a very purposeful life tend to live about 7 years longer than those who don't. Interesting to consider that. Our purpose at a Blue Zones project is to empower everyone everywhere to live better longer. Not just longer, better longer. How many of you have seen the Netflix special? Just by a show of hands. Okay. If you haven't, it's a fun adventure to learn about. It's called Live to 100, and it's a 4-part series. Pretty easy watching. But it talks about the origin story. If you have seen it, that 4th episode where they start talking about community transformations and taking the lessons learned from around the world and applying them at scale in local communities, that's what we're doing. That's kind of what I want to lean in and talk to you about with our project in Petaluma today. So for the time that we have today, I want to give you kind of a little overview of like, what's a Blue Zone? What's it mean? What's a Blue Zones project? And some of the nuts and bolts of what that looks like and the way it shows up in community. And then I just want to yield and receive questions. What are you curious about? What do you want to know about? So if that's okay with y'all for our flow for the next 50 minutes, is that okay? Yeah. All right, good. Also, can I just say how wonderful it is to be in a group of so many empowered, wise, embodied people? Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. All right, so the origin story. This is the group of advisors that supported Dan Buettner in his original research. So Dan Buettner is the founder of the Blue Zones. He had some funding from the National Institutes on Aging, and he partnered with National Geographic. They set off on this expedition around the world to find places where people were living really long, healthy lives. And so they documented it in the best way that a National Geographic photographer can, some beautiful imagery. So you'll see a lot of beautiful imagery here. Their first stop was in Okinawa, Japan, where we see the concentration of the highest concentration of elder women in all the world. And one of the key components that was learned there is how powerful connection and belonging is. In Okinawa, Japan, they have a common practice they call moai, Moi is a word that refers to a tight grouping of community members who go through life together. They resource, support, they're like family for each other. By necessity, it was developed post-World War II. Just for the sheer sake of survivorship, people had to come together and bond to navigate through the rebuild and to support each other. But those friendships continued for decades and are still in place now. They're very well situated in Okinawa, Japan, to live in relationship with the land. You'll see that with a lot of these places where they found people living long, vital lives. They have a really intimate relationship with the outdoor environment. They spend a lot of time in it. They eat and garden. They traverse the land naturally. Sardinia, Italy is a great example of that. That's not an easily navigable community. You have to hike up a lot of stairs and down and such. So you see a lot of people with a lot of vitality and health simply because the environment demands that they move naturally. The environment provides them natural resources such as whole foods, a lot of fresh seafood. And when we think about sort of diets around the world, the Mediterranean diet gets a lot of attention for that. You'll see this in practice here in Sardinia, Italy, where many of the people as they age are actually still farming, growing their own food, doing a lot of the food prep themselves, really intimately connected to the land and the ecosystem, the seasons, eating seasonally. And then I went to Icaria, Greece, where in Icaria, Greece, you can see that they're having a really good time, okay? Let's just talk about how important fun is for health and vitality and longevity. Connection, being tightly woven in a community. Right? After work, they'll travel up and down stairs and mountainsides to come and gather. Having rituals, what we might call a wine at 5, but gathering regularly to just downshift, to be together in community, to find that sense of connection and solidarity. Next, they went to the Nichole Peninsula in Costa Rica. Here we see some really intimate connectedness to each other, to the land, to very different expressions of culture. So I'm thinking about this time of year right now and the traditions that we see that honor ancestors. Many of the Blue Zones communities have practices where they pause and they honor our ancestors. They're honoring the times of the shift of the seasons, things that we don't necessarily do as well as I think we could in our society. We move really quickly in our society. And here in these other societies, the pace of things happens really differently. I think that's important to name. The last one that they discovered actually here in California, Loma Linda, which I think is fascinating because it kind of makes the case that it doesn't have to be in this remote island community. It actually can happen in the United States and happen with people who live lifestyles that might be very similar to our own. So in Loma Linda, what we see is that there's a very strong concentration of Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda. They, by their religious philosophies, they're vegetarian. They are very service-oriented. They volunteer a lot in their community. They're very active. They practice the Sabbath and have an entire day where they're not active and engaged. They're resting and they're taking care of themselves. And so we see the health outcomes of that, in their residents. They're living really long, healthy lives. They're still actively engaged. They're still serving. They're on commissions. They're on boards. They're doing service work, much like you guys are demonstrating in our community here. And so I think it's a rare gift to be able to go out and explore other cultures, to learn from them. What are they doing that's serving them well? And so Dan Buettner and his team had identified that from this, those people who live a long time, they don't really know why they live a long time. They're not like, I'm going to live a long time. No, we're just going to do it. It's not like that. They're living in an environment where healthy choices are not only easy, they're often the only choice. So if you think about that when we think of our culture, are the healthy choices easy? Are they accessible? Affordable? In these 5 regions, they kind of took all these learnings and distilled them down to these core 4 elements where we see movement naturally happening in the environment. We see they have a positive outlook or a right outlook on things. They're eating wisely and they're connecting. None of those are rocket science, but all of those together in practice create conditions conducive for health and well-being. So let's break it down just a little bit. We talked about moving naturally. Now, I got here by car. I walked from my house to my car, so that counts a little bit, I suppose. Barb saved me by getting me parking out front, so I didn't have to walk too far up the mountain. But think about how much are we moving naturally in our daily lives? That's a factor. There's a lot of movement right now we'll see because of the climate crisis where we're getting people to really do what we would call mode shift, get out of their cars, get onto their bikes, get out on the street on their feet and move. Well, there's twofold benefits. It's not just for the environment, it's also for our bodies. So we also see within this right outlook, in all of these communities, they have a very strong sense of purpose. I think I mentioned before, 7 additional years, right? In Costa Rica, they call it the plan de vida, right? My life plan, my mission, what gets me up. In Okinawa, they call it ikigai, right? What is my purpose? Why do I get up in the morning? Something so radical has such a profound impact on our health and well-being and our communities. Now, I just want to reflect back to you for a second. You are a room full of wise, caring, loving, very purposeful human beings who do a lot of amazing service in this community. I just want to shine a mirror back to you. Because right now, at this time, where we have so many people who are emerging post-COVID, we're struggling with this, what we would call an epidemic of isolation, right? It's hard to make this transition back into community and feel connected and feel belonging and feel like I have a place for my purpose to animate and be in the world. You're doing it. You're a part of the healing needed right now. So keep going. Please keep going. But don't forget to rest, right? We all have to downshift. I kind of like to think of this when we're doing group work, like it's like breathing. You breathe in, you breathe out. That there's a rhythm to it. Sometimes when we serve, we step fully in and we give until we burn out. Let's find our rhythm again. Let's step in, let's serve, let's step out, let's rest. Let's step in, let's serve, let's step out, and let's rest. We need to find ways to downshift for our own physical and mental health and well-being, but also for the greater good. We have to model that too, because it's not very easy in our society. Our society drives us hard. Oops, didn't mean to do that. There we go. When it comes to eating wisely, today's meal was a beautiful example of that, a plant slant diet. Most things that were on our plate were plant-based, and we had a little bit of meat. That's the same thing that we saw around the world in these blue zones, except for Loma Linda, who was strictly vegetarian. Also, we observed that people stopped eating at about 80%. So they just reached this place of satiation and went, I'm good. And many of them, again, except Loma Linda, had this practice of having wine in the afternoon in community. So you kind of see where that connects with across the board, right? We're connecting with loved ones. We're downshifting, right? Maybe we're walking naturally to get over to our friend's house to have that glass of wine, right? The more we can kind of get through all of these things, you'll see where it kind of comes into play that this is a holistic model that kind of really does make a case for living well and living long, healthy lives. Now, connect. Most times when we talk about health and well-being in this country, we talk about nutrition and exercise. And we overlook all the other things that we would call those social determinants of health. The things that influence our health, our sense of connection, our sense of belonging, and belonging to people and belonging to place is really important. The beautification brigade, thank you, because it's really nice to live in a place that's beautiful, isn't it? And we have a positive pack, those people that we rely on. So for me, what that looked like when I was going through raising my children, there was these group of mothers that we kept meeting in the hallway when the kids were going in between class. We'd have these little snippets of conversation and realize that we were never going to have a real conversation unless we went and did it ourselves intentionally. So we started meeting monthly, these moms. 19 years later, we still meet and support each other. We've witnessed each other through life, death, celebrations, illnesses, survivorship, all those things. Without my positive pack, I don't know where I'd be. And loved ones. We put our loved ones first. It's kind of tricky sometimes when you think about it in society. Makes sense, we're like, yeah, of course my family comes first. But sometimes the way that we set up our work environments, that makes it really hard. So making sure that we can create spaces where we honor that and we give flexibility for our teams so that we can prioritize family first. So this sort of wheelhouse here is sort of the recipe, the core ingredients, if you will, when we do a Blue Zones project. So I talked a little bit about movement. I'm going to move through these. I probably could have done a better job of advancing these when I spoke. Then we bring these things back into comparison in our country. It looks a little differently here. Good work. We know that there's a better way to be in society, right? We have enormous numbers of nonprofit organizations that provide necessary service in community. We have government agencies at a local, regional, national level that help provide resources to support, and yet we know it's still not enough. We still need to address food insecurities in our community, even with these in play, right? We know that it's still not easy or accessible for everybody to walk safely down the street. Even if I wanted to send my child to school on a bike, I don't know if it's the safest thing for us to do at this stage, right? We don't have necessarily those environmental conditions conducive to bringing in those Power 9 in a really robust way. So a community project is designed to help create those conditions where we can make incremental changes within a community, within the environment of a community, that would help create more conducive conditions for health and longevity. We started out with Albert Lea, Minnesota. In 2008, it was the first pilot project. So we're like, okay, here's Blue Zones. They've done this research. They've just discovered the Power 9. There's beautiful literature and books and everything on it. But okay, so what? What does it mean to us in community? That's great that that's happening over there, but how do we get that to happen here? And that was one of my questions when I first received it, especially after I got into it. When I took that Blue Zone book and I looked at the Power 9, I was like, I can do this. I can do this in my life. I can do this in my family. And it really wasn't that challenging to put into play. You know what was challenging? When my kids left the house and went to school. When they went to soccer practice and the food and the snacks that they were offered at soccer practice didn't meet the needs. When they were out in community unsupervised and eating God knows what from God knows where, right? The environment that I sent my children back out to, even though we made these changes, when they would go out into our environment, they weren't reinforced. They couldn't sustain them. So when we work in communities, we work to create structures that make these changes in the environment happen. So we started in Albert Lea, Minnesota. That was an extraordinary opportunity to learn how could this work? How would we bring this into community? We had some great outcomes there. Went to beach cities down in Southern California. They're still like almost but 14 years later, still doing blue zones. They just embedded it in their community and they run it through their healthcare district. Fort Worth, Texas had a lot of amazing health outcomes. And then we worked with this whole entire healthcare system to be able to help them from that healthcare system from the bottom up. How are we holding spaces for our employees, for our staff? How are we cultivating well-being within the structures that we're a part of? And then creating those things, resources, so that when people came in and entered into the healthcare system could have access to that learning as well. So these are some great examples of where we had great gains with the project. And our work, this is the life radius. This is the way in which we take those Power 9 and apply them in community. So I'm talking about community transformation now. I'm talking about coming into a community, working with the community to identify, what are you doing really well? What do you love about your community? What's working? Okay? And what do you aspire to? What do you hope for? So I want to invite that inquiry here for you. What do you hope for your city, for your community? And what are some of the challenges in getting there? What are their barriers? Is there capacity building that needs to happen? Or is there whole new entities that need to be designed to meet that need? So we look in these communities, work with the community, and then we design based on this life radius model. So by the life radius, we're talking about people, places, and policy. The reason why we're doing this through the environment, and I think it's really powerful when we look at kind of like what does influence health, we know that 20% of it is genetics. So I don't have any genetic predisposition for breast cancer. It was the environment I grew up in and my access to care that were determinants to health for me. So we know that if 20% is genetics, 10% is access to care, the rest of it is in environment and the behaviors that we have within that environment. That's our wheelhouse. That's where we like to play and influence. So Petaluma is the newest Blue Zones project. And the question is kind of like, why Petaluma? How did Petaluma get to be the next one? Well, I'll tell you. Because of the healthcare district, really wanted a Blue Zones project here in Sonoma County and in the North Bay. They were looking to beach cities as a model of what was happening. They were seeing health outcomes. They were seeing a reduction in overweight and obesity. They were seeing a reduction in diabetes. They were seeing an increase in access to healthy food. They were seeing an increase in job retention, in attendance records, a decrease in work comp incidences. Like they were just seeing this kind of across the entire community. And the healthcare district wanted that here. So the healthcare district partnered with the city of Petaluma and Petaluma Valley Hospital Providence to sponsor our project. They reached out to Blue Zones. Blue Zones came in, conducted an assessment, like a feasibility study. Here's what we see. Here's what we think what will happen. Here's where we think the health outcomes would be if we did this upstream investment. And the community said, yes, let's do it. So at that point, that's when I was hired in. Now, Blue Zones is a national company that does this work, and there's a core team that works at the national level, and then we have these project sites around the country. There are now over 80 Blue Zones projects around the country. And here in California, 25% of California counties had some form of a Blue Zones project. So we see this sort of wave of Blue Zones movement that's happening. And it's really inspiring to know that the little bit of work that we're doing in Petaluma, which is a small community of 60,000 people, when you add it up to all those, we're influencing over 2 million community members here in the United States. When we think about big picture, like tipping point models, right? We're on our way. We're on our way. The way that we're working in this project is by impacting the people and the places and the policies that influence us. So when it comes to people, starting with ourselves, making that commitment to ourselves. I'm going to take care of myself for me. And sometimes we might need inspiration outside of ourselves. So I'm going to take care of myself for my family or my students or my team. I'm going to do so by making that commitment and building my social circle. So what we do in community is we create activities, events, trainings, educational opportunities, festivals where we can come together, learn together, connect, create belonging, and we cultivate purpose. So if you think about how many purposeful people are sitting at the table right now, imagine what it might be like if we activated 15% of this community to be more engaged and purposeful. What social good might we all get up to together? So from people in the community to the places where we spend our time, schools, work sites, grocery stores, restaurants, faith-based communities. We go into these places and we build partnerships in these places, and we guide them along to embed health and wellness policies, practices, processes within their organizations, their schools. In a restaurant, you might see some healthier options on a menu because of that. Right? In a grocery store, when you go in, you might see product placement where you walk in and you see produce forward and you see sort of the junk food back. This is our community here. This is one of our recent Petaluma Dental Group is now an approved work site. They've gone through this process with us. They've put into place some of these practices for their team. And then policy. Policy is the piece that enables sustainability of the work. It's an unusual project in that we're not building a project for us to live in perpetuity in a community. We don't want to compete with any other nonprofit organizations or service organization. We're here to resource, support, and lift up what's already going well in the community, bridge gaps, right? And help resource where we see needs. For example, food recovery and redistribution, or addressing the built environment and trying to advocate for more walkable, bikeable streets. So within the policy components, each project has a food systems component. So we're looking at food accessibility in the community, who has it, who doesn't, who's providing it, what's needed next, and helping to resource and draw down through grant funds or other means to kind of build a robust infrastructure so that we can meet the nutritional needs of our community. We work within the built environment not only to create more pedestrian-friendly environments, but safer pedestrian environments for us to use. So we're doing like walking audits and looking, how are our trail systems? Are they well lit? Do they tell us where we're going? Is there wayfinding signage? What can we be doing differently within our natural environment to make it such that we want to get out there and move naturally in it? And then Blue Zones Projects focuses on tobacco and alcohol. But because in Sonoma County's been working on tobacco cessation efforts for about 15 years. And I don't think there's any more robust policies that could be put in place than what we've got going on in the North Bay right now. So we're leaning in on alcohol, which is an interesting and a taboo subject to talk about in wine country. In Petaluma, and I love Petaluma, but Petaluma was recently designated with Santa Rosa to be one of the drunkest cities in California. And they get to that determination based on adult behavior risk assessments, like when you go to your doctor and you report how many drinks you're drinking, that kind of thing, but also DUI records. We have a DUI problem in the North Bay. We have normalized alcohol to such a point, paired with the fact that we're dealing with an epidemic of isolation, and there's a lot of self-medication happening with alcohol. We've created conditions that we really need to look at and talk to. We need to educate better with our communities. And for us in Petaluma, what that looks like is parent and student education. It looks like helping to create a voucher system so that if you do imbibe too much, because we're not saying don't drink, we're just saying be mindful and be responsible. So helping to make sure that when somebody is having responsible alcohol use, they're not going back out on the street and doing something that's risky, if we're also encouraging people to walk and bike more, right? So systems, we're looking at overall systems and what are the things that we can do within these systems to make them more conducive for health and well-being. So this is kind of this is the areas within which we work within a Blue Zones project. This is fun. This is our mayor of Petaluma. He's leading a bicycle group to an event. That's our steering committee. Everything that we do in a Blue Zones project is done with community, not for community. Within the principles of equitable design, we design with, we don't design for. So I have a very robust steering committee meeting or gathering. We have 24 people on our steering committee who advise me. They're cross-sector leaders from across all the spectrums which we touch. They advise, they inform, they ultimately approve the blueprint, which is our strategic plan for what we're doing here. Then within that, within each of those areas, policy, places, and people, there are other committees that inform and advise what we do, how we do it, the way in which we do it. So remember earlier on, I was talking about like these are the core ingredients that we get from Blue Zones. Well, all these people, they're the spice. They're the flavor. They're what make this thing savory and delicious and fun and nourishing, truly nourishing. I mentioned the blueprint. The blueprint you can access if you go to that QR code. It's also on our website. I wanted to presence this because the first 9 months of a project is all about research and discovery, and then coming together, and the community helps us decide what are we going to do. What are the things that we want to be a part of? Where do we want to see our stretch go within this community? And then it's all in the blueprint. The blueprint is like a working document. We refresh it every year because every year we can't really account for, the uncertainties that happen in community, changes in the political landscape or changes in the funding networks, things that can affect the work that we're doing. So we refresh it, and we're in that process with ours right now. We're just coming to the end of the third quarter of our first year. Now, I'm going to pause because I'm mindful this is a group of very engaged, involved community members. And I would never, ever ask you to do more than what you're already doing. But I might invite this. In the places where you serve, in the places where you give your gifts of love, where you feel purposeful, meaningful engagement in this community, what might be one or two things that you can draw down and infuse into that space that helps change that space, the environment? Is it the way we conduct our meetings? Is it the meals that we serve that we can do differently? Is it the decision-making process and how people might have great ideas to bring to the forefront? Think about this. How might you take some of these things, draw them down into your everyday life and put them into practice here? And I'll kind of close with one thing that we're observing in our community that I think is really powerful. In Petaluma, we have kind of a really strong core group. We call it like the same 50 people who volunteer and lead, do it across all the places in the community. I see some nods. So we're not uncommon in that phenomenon. We see that, right? Where we have a lot of leaders who step forward often. And when we did our well-being survey, we learned that the average Petaluman volunteers less than 10 hours over a 6-month period. And it's sort of unbelievable to think that so much can get done in such a wonderful community by such a small group of people. But I'm sitting in a room here and I see the same thing. Concentrated communities where you feel that deep sense of belonging to place, to community, to each other. You tend to come back more and continue serving. And so in our community, what we're doing is trying to stimulate more of that, where people feel like they can have the opportunity in community to bring their gifts forward in a way that's really meaningful for them. So what we've done is we've started opening up the invitation to our community for people to be ambassadors, to learn about our Blue Zones project, and then to say, okay, I'm looking at our community. I know we have some mental health challenges because we're just coming out of this pandemic and it rocked us all. It's really hard to get people to engage consistently right now as we kind of step back out of social isolationism. It's a little bit of a dance. It's like one step in and maybe 2 steps back out, and then 1 step back in. And so as we're learning how to dance with community so that we're all kind of in this movement building together, we're asking them, what is needed and what do you have within you that you want to bring forward? And I'll tell you, it's amazing what's come forward in our community. So we have a young woman who said, I believe in breathwork and I want to teach breathwork classes. And now she's teaching a 10-week breathwork group. I had another participant come forward and she says, I work in the death industry and we don't talk about death at all in our culture. I want to create a death cafe. So every month we have a death cafe. We have a woman who works in living history. And she says, wouldn't it be so fun if I dressed like Helen Putnam and we did a hike at Helen Putnam Park? And so now every week on Friday, there's a group of people who go out and do a living history tour at Helen Putnam Park. And I'm just seeding ideas here because this is a room that's very fertile. It seems like you receive ideas and grow them into tremendous fruition. So take these ideas that I'm sharing with you. Keep doing the good work that you're doing. You are the resilience in the heart of this community. So thank you so much for what you're doing. And thank you for inviting me in to share a little bit about kind of Blue Zones and our Blue Zones project in Petaluma. And so now I just want to pause and answer any questions that you might have. That one right there.
I've heard that in order for an area to be considered blue zone, that they can't have a fast food restaurant. And I understand that Petaluma has a three. So I was wondering what you plan or how you plan to remedy that.
Well, first I think I want to kind of level set. So we're not telling a community you can't become a Blue Zones community if you have fast food. I think that would preclude almost every single community in the United States. But I am saying this, where we do lean in is in Petaluma. Petaluma now has a moratorium to prevent new fast foods that have drive-throughs to go through. So we know that sometimes as a parent, at the end of the day, you need to get a quick meal. You need to feed the kiddos before you do the next things. And those fast food options are really tempting and really easy. We know that by that simple act of removing that drive-through, that becomes a barrier, a deterrent to them, making that, it becomes less easy for them to go access it in that way. So we're not saying you can't have fast food restaurants in your community. What we are saying is we'll work with some of them if they want to have healthier options. Some communities have been working with food trucks to have the food trucks that are going out into areas that might have been what we would refer to kind of as like a food desert, that they would then have healthier options available as well as their conventional options. Did that answer your question?
I thought it was a criteria that you could have a.
No.
But I don't
Thanks.
think Loma Linda has any.
I don't know. I've never been to Loma Linda. I'll have to ask my organization and well-being lead. She's from Loma Linda, so I'll ask her.
My son goes to school there.
Oh, and
He said they don't serve meat.
they don't serve meat.
They don't have fast food restaurants.
Yeah. Well, then that would definitely make the case for why in an environment it's easier to go to that healthier choice if they don't even have it available. Yeah. Yes.
First of all, congratulations on beating breast cancer.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a survivor as well, so yes.
Mm-hmm.
My question goes to the personal and then to the greater. The personal is that sometimes one of those components of personal well-being
Mm-hmm.
you just don't have.
Yep.
Like maybe your loved one's have passed,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you can't move. And my guess is then, therefore, you try to put more emphasis into what you do have.
I would agree with that.
That would be my guess. And then I'm guessing as a community effort, if there are things that you just can't get, you work harder on the other things you can.
That's right. From an overall health perspective, I weigh it out in risks and protective benefits, right? And you know that those risks, sometimes we can't risk mitigate all the risks. So where we can't, we want to build those protective factors, right? So that's how I would describe that. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? We have one over here on the left of the room. Oop.
We're fortunate here in downtown Mill Valley to have the Mill Valley Market. That tends to be produce forward. But just a mile down the road, some of the people that stock the shelves will say it's money that talks. And it's the wine that's forward. It's the candy aisle that's forward.
That's true.
The produce is on the side. And so how does the Blue Zone organization work with big money, big companies, the Cheeto company or whatever?
That's such a great question. And you're right? There is incentive for grocery stores to put product placement right next to the aisles at checkout. And oftentimes they'll pay extra for that opportunity to do that. And in those cases where we've worked with some of the grocery stores, we've acknowledged that. And that's an important income stream for that business, and we would not touch that. And we would invite in, can we have one aisle, one checkout stand, where those end cap are maybe healthier option granola bars, or you have some fresh fruit, or you bring something else that's forward. And you don't necessarily have to do all of them just to educate. Just that one can serve in that case. So we went down, we visited a project in Salinas in Monterey County, and they worked with a grocery store there called La Princesa, which is specifically serving the Latino community. And there, like, they lift up a lot of the natural foods and the beans, right? It's a very common core element in their diet. So it wasn't too much of a hard sell to say, let's bring your beans forward facing. Let's bring your produce that you're doing double up CalFresh bucks on. Let's bring that forward facing so that when the community walks in, they know, okay, that's something that I can get that's going to be really healthy for my family, and it's going to be more affordable for me in the bottom line. Because that's the other thing. If we're looking at food equity, it's more than just where is it distributed. Like there are some beautiful farmers markets and stands around in the rural areas. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're affordable or accessible to those people who might live nearby them. Same thing when we get into some of those more concentrated, dense community members where you see a lot of corner markets. Oftentimes you see them stacked with junk food, right? So it's kind of just going in and working with them and educating them and asking them, what are your values? Do you value having a healthy community? And if so, are you willing to make some small changes in your product placement, or some small changes in what you're offering the community? Everybody wants health, really. And so it's kind of speaking to them from that place of common value. Good question. Any others? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nichole.
Oh, thank you so much. So much.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. See you next week at the fashion show.
Oh, fun. Great.
Thank you so much, Nichole.